Let me ask you something. If you saw a child trembling in fear, alone, silent, scared, what would you do? Would you look away? Or would you step closer, even if just to offer something small, something gentle? Today's story begins with nothing more than a soft green toy, and ends with the quiet arrival of a man whose name alone could silence a room. A man no one thought could be moved, until one simple act of kindness left him speechless. If you believe that what we do when no one is watching can still touch hearts that seem frozen, then please, tap that like button, because here, we share stories that matter. Stories that heal. Stories that remind us. Sometimes the smallest gestures reach the deepest places. Let's begin. Sunday mornings at the Hollow Oak Cafe had a certain rhythm. The kind of quiet hum that came from coffee cups clinking gently on saucers, the faint shuffle of newspapers, and the low murmur of weekend conversations. Tucked just off a tree-lined avenue, the little cafe had become something of a local tradition, where families gathered after church, and where regulars knew which waitress brought the warmest smiles. That morning, the light streaming through the front windows was soft and golden, casting a gentle glow over the tables. Haley, 25, had just tied her apron when she noticed him. In the far corner, nearly hidden behind the tall-backed booth, sat a little boy. Alone. He couldn't have been more than 6 years old, white, thin shoulders drawn in tightly beneath a navy hoodie. His small hands trembled slightly as they clutched the edge of the table, and his lips were pressed together in a tight, almost frightened line. His face was pale. His eyes stared straight ahead, unblinking, unsure, overwhelmed. There was no adult sitting with him. Only a man in a dark coat standing just outside the glass doors, speaking into a phone, likely the driver, Haley guessed. She paused, just for a moment. Her hands hovered over the order pad she hadn't yet used. Most servers might have waited, assumed the family would come in shortly. But Haley had made a quiet habit of paying attention, especially to the kids who didn't quite fit into the comfortable murmur of the dining room. And in her apron pocket, nestled between pens and folded napkins, were a few small toys, soft, well-worn, chosen not for show, but for comfort. She stepped gently toward the booth, crouched down so she wasn't towering above him. Her voice was soft, like she didn't want to startle the silence he was wrapped in. "Hey there," she said gently. "You look a little nervous. I've got something that helps with that." The boy didn't answer. He didn't even look at her. But he didn't flinch either. He just stayed still, like a deer in a clearing. From her pocket, Haley pulled out a small green dinosaur. Not just any toy, this one had little stitched eyes, and soft fabric that had clearly been loved. She called it Breezy, a name she'd given it long ago, when she realized some kids needed something to help them breathe easier. "This is Breezy," she whispered. "He's a deep-breathing dinosaur. He's really good at helping little guys feel a little less scared." She set the dinosaur on the table slowly, not pushing it toward him, just placing it there. And then, instead of leaving right away, she stayed. Not too close. Not asking questions. Just giving space. For a long second, nothing happened. And then, so gently it was easy to miss, the boy's fingers released the tight grip on the table. One hand moved. It landed softly on the green plush. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. But he pulled the little dinosaur toward him, wrapped his arms around it, and rested it against his chest like it was the only safe thing in the world. Haley didn't say another word. She just gave a small nod, her eyes kind, and stood up slowly. Across the room, the espresso machine hissed, and a waitress called out a table number. The world went on. But at that one booth in the corner, something small and important had just shifted. The little dinosaur remained tucked in the boy's arms like a lifeline, its soft green fabric gently pressed against his chest. Haley returned to the counter but kept a subtle eye on the booth, not in a hovering way, just enough to notice if he needed anything else. A few minutes passed. The boy still hadn't spoken a word. She checked on other tables, refilled coffees, took a few new orders, And then once the morning rush slowed just a bit, she circled back with a glass of water and a quiet smile. "Mind if I sit for a second?" she asked, not expecting an answer. The boy didn't say yes. He didn't say no. But his eyes flicked toward her, then to the seat across from him, and back again. She took it as a maybe, and slid in slowly, placing the glass of water in front of him. "I'm Haley," she offered, voice still low. "That guy in your arms, he's breezy. He's helped a lot of kids. He's really good at listening. And breathing." Still no reply. "I like to think he can hear your heart," she added, "so he knows how fast it's going. And when it's too fast, he reminds you to slow it down. In and out. Just like him." She inhaled gently, a slow breath in, then out, silent, steady, intentional. The boy's fingers clutched Breezy a little tighter. His eyes blinked, and for the first time, something in his body seemed to shift. Not much. But the tremor in his shoulders eased slightly, like the storm inside had taken one small step back. "You don't have to talk," she said simply. "I just thought he might like to meet you. That's all." She didn't push. Didn't ask his name. Didn't try to distract him with silly jokes or bright noise. She just sat for a moment, watching as his shoulders settled another fraction lower. Then, with a little nod, she stood up again. "I'll be right over there at the counter if you need me, okay?" As she turned to go, she saw it, out of the corner of her eye. The boy's hand moved. Slowly. Deliberately. He reached toward the laminated menu and began to flip it open. It wasn't much. Just a quiet motion. But for a child who hadn't looked up, hadn't spoken, hadn't moved since sitting down, it was everything. Haley smiled, a smile she didn't show on her face but carried in her chest. She returned to the counter, heart strangely full. She didn't even hear the front door open. But the sudden shift in energy made her look up. The cafe had gone still. Conversations tapered off. Even the sizzling from the kitchen seemed to pause. A man had entered. Tall. Impeccably dressed in a dark wool coat over a gray suit. Silver-streaked hair combed back with precision. Polished shoes, deliberate stride, a presence that pulled the air tighter with each step. He didn't glance around. He walked straight toward the booth in the corner, toward the boy. Every server in the cafe seemed to notice him at once. Haley didn't need anyone to tell her who he was. Julian Westfield. Even if she hadn't recognized his face from news articles or real estate reports, the way the room reacted said enough. He wasn't just any businessman. He was the kind of man people whispered about, owner of hotels, towers, and probably more buildings than anyone could count downtown. He reached the booth and knelt slightly, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. The boy didn't flinch. But he didn't speak either. Julian paused. Then his gaze dropped, and landed on the little green dinosaur nestled in the boy's lap. His hand froze. For a brief moment, something flickered across his face. Not anger. Not confusion. Something more complicated. Something softer. His eyes lifted, and met Haley's across the room. She was standing behind the counter, tray in hand, frozen mid-step. Their eyes locked. She didn't smile. Didn't wave. She didn't even breathe. And yet, somehow, the moment was filled with more meaning than any introduction ever could carry. The man standing beside the booth didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Julian Westfield's presence spoke louder than any introduction ever could. The hush that had fallen over the cafe lingered, stretching out like a held breath. Even the clink of cutlery had gone silent, as if the air itself understood that someone of importance had entered the room. He looked down at the little boy in the booth, at Owen, then gently placed a hand on the child's shoulder. It wasn't a hurried gesture. It was soft, familiar, restrained. A father's touch. Owen didn't pull away. Julian's eyes followed the curve of his son's arms, where they were wrapped tightly around the green plush dinosaur. Breezy. He stopped. For a man known for decisive moves and sharp instincts, the stillness in his expression was striking. He didn't blink. Didn't speak. Just looked. Then slowly, he lifted his gaze across the room, to the counter. To her. Haley felt the weight of it instantly. His eyes were unreadable, but something in them caught her breath in her throat. He wasn't angry. Not exactly. But he was assessing. Measuring. She stood perfectly still, tray still in her hands, caught between instincts. Part of her wanted to step forward and explain. Another part knew she had done nothing wrong, and didn't owe anyone an apology for being kind. Still, something in her stomach twisted. Behind her, a quiet whisper floated out from the kitchen pass-through, barely audible. "Is that who I think it is?" Another server, Kelsey, leaned in slightly, eyes wide. Her voice low, sharp with surprise. "That's Julian Westfield, right? The real estate guy." The manager peeked out from the office door and visibly paled. "Why is he here?" But Haley barely registered the voices. Her attention was locked on Owen, and the man beside him. Julian hadn't moved. He looked down again at the dinosaur. A flicker of something, curiosity, maybe even confusion, crossed his face. He reached forward and gently touched the plush with his fingertips, as if trying to understand how it ended up there. Still, Owen clung to it. The boy's grip remained tight, his chin resting lightly on the toy's soft head, eyes half closed as though the outside world didn't matter anymore. Julian withdrew his hand. The silence held. Then finally, he slid into the booth beside his son. No grand gestures. No words. Just presence. From behind the counter, Haley exhaled, so quietly she barely felt the air leave her lungs. Her hands trembled slightly as she set the tray down. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if she had crossed some invisible line. Another whisper came from behind her. "Oh my God," Kelsey murmured, peeking around. "Did you seriously just give one of your toys to his kid?" Haley didn't answer. Her voice wouldn't have carried even if she'd tried. She could feel every eye on her, not just because of the man in the suit, but because for one moment, the quiet act of handing a small dinosaur to a frightened child had become complicated. Maybe even dangerous. She turned away from the counter, busying herself with glasses she didn't need to clean. Her heart pounded. She knew how things worked. Powerful people didn't like surprises. Especially not when they involved their children. And yet, despite the heavy silence, Owen looked calmer than he had since he walked in. The plush toy remained in his arms, its tiny green tail sticking out just enough to be visible across the room. Julian Westfield didn't speak a single word during their time at the cafe. He simply sat beside his son, one arm resting on the back of the booth, his posture composed yet unreadable. His silver watch glinted faintly in the soft morning light, but his eyes, those didn't move much. They stayed fixed, from time to time, on the counter where Haley worked. Watching. He didn't glance at the menu. He didn't order anything himself. He let Owen flip through the pages slowly, occasionally nodding when the boy pointed at something. Pancakes, orange juice, maybe eggs. The waitress who took their order did so in near silence, almost afraid to speak too loud. Julian's presence seemed to mute the entire room. Haley stayed out of the way. She knew better than to approach again. The plush dinosaur had remained in Owen's arms the entire meal, occasionally patted or squeezed as he ate slowly. There was something heartbreaking about the way he held it, not like a toy, but like a tether to safety. Julian never asked where it came from. But he never took it away either. Instead, he just watched. Haley tried not to meet his gaze. Her hands were steady, but only because she willed them to be. Inside, a storm churned, equal parts uncertainty and quiet defense. She hadn't done anything wrong. She knew that. And yet, something in the air made her question herself. Eventually, the man stood. He helped Owen down from the booth, placed a hand briefly on the boy's back, and walked with him toward the front entrance. They didn't stop to say goodbye. No eye contact. No acknowledgement. And then they were gone. The door clicked softly behind them, and the cafe seemed to breathe again. Haley exhaled, bracing herself for what she knew was coming. It didn't take long. 10 minutes later, she was called to the manager's office. It wasn't the first time she'd been summoned there, but this time, the air was thicker, more tense. Tom, the floor manager, stood by the desk holding his phone, his brow furrowed as he showed her the screen. A social media post. A blurry photo. Owen at the booth, dinosaur in hand. The caption read, "Waitress gives personal toy to billionaire's son. Wonder how that went." Haley stared at the image, expression unreadable. "Haley," Tom began, carefully. "Did you give a personal item to a guest? To his kid?" She didn't flinch. "Yes," she said calmly. "You understand the position that puts us in, right? If that goes viral, or if he decides to say something." He didn't say anything. Tom hesitated. "Still, it's not policy to hand out personal belongings to customers, especially not children. Liability issues. Parental concerns. What if?" The boy was shaking, she said quietly. He needed something softer than fear. That silenced the room. Tom blinked, his mouth half open as if ready with another managerial phrase. But it didn't come. Haley didn't explain further. She didn't need to. She turned, left the office, and went back to folding napkins at the prep station. Her chest still tight, but her conscience clear. The morning after felt just like any other. The same hum of early prep work in the kitchen, the familiar clatter of silverware, and the faint aroma of brewed coffee curling through the air. Haley tied her apron as usual, nodding to the cook and wiping down the counter in practiced rhythm. If not for the tight knot still lodged behind her ribs, she might have convinced herself that yesterday had been a dream. The booth where Owen had sat remained empty, its cushion slightly creased, as if holding the memory of the small silent boy who had clutched a stuffed dinosaur like his life depended on it. She hadn't spoken to anyone about what happened after the shift. There was nothing to explain. No reprimand, no official warning. Just a closed-door conversation and a quiet return to routine. Then, shortly after opening, a knock came from the back entrance. Unusual, but not alarming. Vendors sometimes delivered ingredients through the rear to avoid the morning foot traffic. Tom, the manager, was the one who opened the door. But instead of boxes of eggs or sacks of flour, a man in a black coat, clearly not kitchen staff, stood holding a small parcel, no bigger than a shoebox. It was addressed, in elegant handwriting, to one person. Haley Quinn. Tom carried it over with raised eyebrows, but said nothing. Just handed it to her with a kind of curious caution, then turned back toward the office, pretending not to watch from the corner of his eye. Haley looked down at the box. No return address. No logo. Just her name. She untied the string carefully, not rushing. Something about the neatness of the wrapping told her this wasn't an accident. It was intentional, personal. Inside was a square of fine tissue paper, and tucked within it, a dinosaur. Not the same one she'd given Owen, but nearly identical. Only this one was different. Its stitching was neater, the fabric finer, velvet soft, in a deep moss green with tiny embroidery around the eyes and paws. Breezy, upgraded. A bespoke version of the one she carried in her apron pocket every shift. She lifted it gently, her fingers running along the seams. Whoever made this had spared no detail. And then she saw the envelope. Cream-colored, thick, folded with precision. Her name wasn't on it, but she somehow knew it was for her. She opened it slowly. Inside was a handwritten note, the script elegant but firm, each word penned with deliberate weight. "My son does not let anyone near him when he's afraid. You were the first. Even before me. I don't know who you are. But I know this. What you gave him was not a toy. It was trust. If you're willing, I would like to meet. I want to understand my son the way you clearly do. Perhaps you can help me begin. J.W. Haley read the note twice, her fingers tightening slightly at the last line. Julian Westfield. She exhaled, slowly. The cafe buzzed on around her, cups clinking, orders being called out. But she stood still, surrounded by the silence only the deeply personal could bring. No one else saw the contents. She folded the letter and returned it to the envelope, gently pressing the flap closed as if sealing away something fragile. Then she looked at the plush dinosaur again, sleek, soft, and perfect in its design. A mirror of what she had given without thinking. Not for praise. Not for favor. Just because a child needed it. And now, a man who owned half the skyline wanted to meet her, not for business, not for complaint, but for something far more human. To ask for help understanding his own son. She stood there, quiet, the morning light spilling in from the front windows. Breezy, new breezy, rested in her hands. And though she didn't say a word, Haley knew. This wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. A week later, the elevator doors opened onto the rooftop garden of Westfield Tower. Haley stepped out into a space unlike anything she had imagined. It was quiet, not with the hush of emptiness, but with the serenity of intentional design. Paved stone paths curved between flower beds and neatly trimmed hedges. A fountain murmured gently in the background, and the skyline of the city stretched far beyond, softened by the early morning light. She had dressed carefully, nothing fancy, just neat. A simple blouse, clean shoes, and a small canvas tote bag over her shoulder. Inside, tucked safely beside a wrapped sandwich and a notebook, was something old and familiar. As she stepped into the open space, she spotted them. Julian Westfield was seated on a long wooden bench beneath a trellis of ivy. His son, Owen, stood a few feet away from him, holding something green in his hands. When Owen saw her, he didn't hesitate. He ran. Not fast, not wildly, but with the unmistakable rhythm of excitement, the kind children reserve for someone who made them feel safe. He clutched the plush dinosaur, the new Breezy, and held it out like a prize as he approached. Haley crouched instinctively, her smile soft but full. "Well, hey there," she said. "Looks like someone brought a friend." Owen didn't speak, but his eyes lit up, his arms lifting Breezy in an unspoken gesture of welcome. Haley reached into her tote and pulled out another dinosaur, worn, gently faded, with slightly frayed seams. "Guess what?" she whispered, holding it out. "I brought the original Breezy too. Sometimes, the old things are what make us feel safe. You don't have to choose. You can keep both." Owen looked at the two plush toys, then tucked the new one under one arm and reached slowly for the old one, hugging them both against his chest. Julian stood and approached, his stride steady, measured. "Thank you for coming," he said. Haley rose to her feet, nodding politely. "Thank you for the invitation." They sat on opposite ends of the bench, a comfortable space between them. Owen remained close, sitting cross-legged on the grass near Haley's feet, his hands still wrapped tightly around the two Breezies. For a while, they simply watched him. Julian spoke first. "You know, I've hired specialists, therapists, consultants from Europe. Every expert in child psychology that money can buy. And still, no one's ever been able to reach him the way you did." Haley didn't answer immediately. She looked down at Owen, who was now tracing the edge of the dinosaur's foot with his finger. "I didn't try to fix him," she said quietly. "I just sat with him." Julian turned to her, his expression unusually soft. "That morning, when I walked into the cafe, I thought I knew my son. I thought I was protecting him by keeping the world at a distance." He paused, watching his child for a long moment. "But then I saw him holding that toy. Letting someone near. Trusting, for the first time in years. And I realized something terrifying." "What's that?" Haley asked gently. Julian exhaled. That I had no idea how to reach my own son. And that someone else, a stranger, had shown him something I couldn't. His voice didn't crack. But there was something behind the calm tone that carried more weight than tears ever could. Haley nodded slowly. He wasn't looking for someone to fix him. He just needed someone to see him. And not walk away. Julian leaned back slightly, letting the quiet settle between them. The wind rustled through the leaves overhead. Then he said, almost to himself, I have wealth. Properties. Power in boardrooms. But that day, you gave my son something I could never buy. He looked at her then, directly. You gave him unconditional trust. Haley looked away, not out of discomfort, but because the moment felt too big for eye contact. She watched Owen instead, who was now gently pressing the two dinosaurs together, as if introducing old friends. I didn't do anything special, she said finally. I just gave what I had. Julian shook his head. That's what makes it rare. They sat together a little while longer, not as strangers, not as server and billionaire, but as two people brought together by a moment of quiet connection. Owen looked up, and for the first time that day, he reached for Haley's hand. And just like that, a bridge no therapist could build had formed, soft, steady, and deeply human. In a world that moves too fast, where success is often measured in titles and possessions, we sometimes forget the quiet power of something deeply human, presence. Haley didn't have wealth. She didn't have a degree in child psychology. She didn't even have permission, technically, to give away a toy. But she had something that most people overlook, she noticed. She noticed a little boy, sitting alone, trembling with fear. And instead of looking away, she moved closer. She didn't try to fix him. She didn't talk over his silence. She simply offered something soft. Something kind. Something that asked for nothing in return. And that's where the lesson lies. You don't need to be powerful to make a difference. You don't need to be rich to offer comfort. Sometimes the simplest gesture, a moment of eye contact, a steady voice, a small stuffed animal, can do more than hours of professional intervention. What Haley gave Owen wasn't just a toy. It was a message. You are safe. You are seen. And I'm not going anywhere. And it changed everything. For those of us who've lived long enough to see the world grow louder, colder, and more complicated, perhaps the deeper truth is this. The moments that truly matter often happen quietly. In cafes. On sidewalks. At home. They're not captured in headlines or celebrated in awards. They're found in the space between fear and comfort, when one person chooses to care, even when no one's watching. Julian Westfield had everything, except the one thing his son needed most, someone who didn't walk away when things got difficult. And in one small moment, a waitress gave him that. Without agenda. Without expectation. So maybe that's the reminder we all need. You never know when your simple kindness will be the lifeline someone else is holding on to. You never know whose heart you might reach, not through perfection, but through presence. And maybe, just maybe, the greatest gift we ever give won't be something we buy, but the decision to stop, notice, and offer something soft enough to calm another's fear. If you believe that a small toy, offered at just the right moment, can become the first thread that ties a fragile heart back to the world, then please, give this video a like. And don't forget to subscribe, where each week we share true stories of kindness, quiet courage, and the moments that truly matter. Thank you for watching until the very end. We'll see you next time, with another story that just might stay with you long after the screen fades to black.